From the Toronto Star, I'm Sabah Itazaz, and this matters. Icy roads, grey skies, and cold noses. We all know a Canadian winter is coming. It's just around the corner and it can be tough for many of us. But COVID-19 and all the cabin fever isn't making it any easier. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, if you're like me, you're probably dreading this winter. According to the Canadian Mental Health Association, about 15% of Canadians experience a wave of low emotions during the upcoming cold, dark days, commonly known as the winter blues. While about 3% experience a condition called Seasonal Affective Disorder that can actually impair daily life and might need therapy and medical treatment. We've already been on an emotional and psychological roller coaster with COVID-19 surges and all that comes with it. And we know there's more coming. Even with the hope of all the vaccine buzz, we're still going to need to get through this unprecedented winter. So in today's episode, we're going to talk coping skills. Joining me today is Dr. JianLi Wang, the Director of the Work and Mental Health Research Unit at the Royal Institute of Mental Health Research in Ottawa. And he's going to explain the ways we can assess ourselves and make sure we're okay, and how we can fight back some of those pandemic winter blues. Thank you, Dr. JianLi Wang, for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, can we talk about seasonal affective disorder, or SAD? How common is that in countries with extreme winters like ours? What does the research say?
Well, the research say, it's quite common for this type of mood disorder because it's usually due to the lack of sunlight during the winter, and the people feel sad and blue. And so it is called a seasonal affective disorder. It usually happens about 2 or 3% of the population.
And what are the symptoms of that? First of all, also now a lot of experts are expressing worry that the pandemic might have amplified winter blues or this disorder to a whole new level. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, in terms of the symptoms, it's not so much different from the regular major depressive episode, such as feeling sad, depressed, loss of interest, and lack of energy and difficulties in concentration, etc. But this is not kind of like I would say a perfect timing for these type of mental health problems, literally, in a negative way. If we look at our history, whenever economic crisis or the natural disasters occur, there's always a negative impact on population mental health of the population who are exposed. This pandemic is worse because it affects the whole population, in scale, and also because of the public health measures and restrictions, we're taking. And also the winter is coming, and so naturally we are thinking about this type of mood disorder called seasonal affective disorder. So the second wave and the public health restriction and the seasonal factor comes together at the same time. And so it is reasonable to believe this could have a negative impact on the population mental health, but we don't know the magnitude of it.
Right. A very scary combination with the coming winter as well. So far, what have you observed? What have been the biggest mental health issues resulting from COVID-19 and the accompanying conditions, as you mentioned?
Well, according to the Statistical Canada data, I think the most prevalent mental health issues are anxiety and depression, the feeling of loneliness. Because when this is unprecedented, so we don't know what are the consequences and how long it's going to last. So people will naturally feel kind of worried about the future, about their work, about their friends and families' health, etc. So anxiety is very common, and also depression because of the public health measures, the physical distance, and the quarantine, the isolation at home. So people feel kind of isolated and lonely, and that will lead to depression.
And as you mentioned, this is a very unprecedented time for everybody, and there are things that everybody's still finding out about this. But is there any research so far or risk prediction tools that might be in the development to assess what could now be a sort of cyclical impact of COVID-19? Because it seems like it is going to be a part of our lives for a while at least.
Well, good question. No, I would say not yet for depression or anxiety related to the pandemic. But my team, we have developed a risk predictive tool several years ago. We used the data from over 10,000 Canadians, which were collected by StatsCan. So we developed sex-specific risk predictive tools for major depressive episode. Say the tool can be used by the general public now, I would say, and based on your exposure to a key set of risk factors, and then two can tell you your personalized probability of having a major depressive episode in the future, down the road, say 4 years down the road. And then from that individual risk, and then you can tell whether or not you are at high risk, in comparison to the Canadian general population. So if you are at a high risk, then you can take preventive actions and do something and to help yourself so you don't have depression at the first place. And this tool is in the public domain, and you can do the self-assessment at the website called predictingdepression.com. So we have a website for that. The website was built several years ago for the self-assessment and to estimate baseline population, baseline risk. It was developed before the pandemic. To my knowledge, there's no specific tools for predicting depression due to the pandemic. So we don't have the data.
But there is a website for people to go on to and gauge their risks, right? So I've talked to a few people and I've noticed this in common. As we sort of went into the second lockdown, a lot of them are talking about a strange sort of apathy or lethargy setting in. They'd actually managed to establish some kind of routine or structure initially, and they were coping well. And suddenly they're reporting losing interest or enthusiasm in those activities that were keeping them going, like even reading or watching movies. Is this a specific combination of pandemic stress and winter blues we're now confronted with? Is this normal?
Well, it could be the combination or the combined impact. But on the other hand, it could also be normal reaction, because when we're talking about mental health, it's not a kind of a binary concept. It's kind of on the spectrum, right? It's from you're perfectly mentally healthy on one hand to the extreme on the other hand. Whenever we face uncertainty or stressful situation, we always feel, stressed or, kind of react to that external factors. It's normal adaptation to the environment. It could be over. Many of us, I would say, can back to normal once it's over. But there's a small proportion of those will progress to the severe end. But it can be just a normal adaptation to the environment.
We'll be right back. Dr. JianLi, let's talk about coping tools or strategies, even as we're getting into the peak of winter and more restricted in our movements because of that and COVID. What can we do, even if it's just a small thing every day that could bring us some joy? Is there a way we can recondition our brain, shift our perspective to feel that joy, even without the added pressure of doing something, if we can't bring ourselves to do that?
Well, there are a number of things we can do. For example, we can learn more about mental health problems, know more about it, the signs and the symptoms and the risk factors, etc., to improve your mental health literacy. We have done well. In the past, we have done very well for physical illness, like the flu, like the heart disease, diabetes. I think we should do the same for mental health problems. And you can find the information from the Canadian Psychiatric Association website or the Canadian Mental Health Association website. As I just mentioned, not all the symptoms, or the negative feeling you are experiencing will turn into a full-blown of mental disorders. The other thing you may do is to do a self-assessment using the tool, as I just described, to see how likely you will have depression to determine whether or not you are at high risk. And you could also use the questionnaires or scales called a patient health questionnaire, which is just 9 questions, or the generalized anxiety disorder questionnaires, which is just 7 questions. And just to do a quick assessment so you know what is going on with you, whether or not the negative feelings you're experiencing is depression or anxiety, and where you are in terms of your mental health. The instruments can be easily found on the website. It's all in the public domain, just like the risk calculator we just developed. And, once you determine you are really having such a negative depression or anxiety, having such a negative feelings, you can take some preventive actions, which may include a range of things that you can do based on your own situation. This may include physical activities and a workout at your basement, or when the weather is good, or walking outside, in the sunshine. Have a good sleep and build a good routine, having a balanced diet, and also maybe share your concerns or your emotional issues with the people you trust. I think the people can find a series of videos on the Royal Hospital's website, and which these videos are produced by this mental health specialist, like psychiatrist, psychologist. And these short videos can teach you how to recognize the symptoms and how to cope with specific issues. These are just good self-care strategies. So you can do it anytime and don't wait until you really become sick. And for many of us, I think what we're doing is take advantage of the digital technologies, like using the social media or Zoom or Skype to connect with the people, our families, maybe living in the same cities or in the different cities. So you can be better supported by your friends and the families. And so, even though we have the physical distancing, but, with the digital technology, you have to have the psychological distancing. And also for the, if you're health workers or healthcare workers or frontline responders, there's also specific things that you may do. Like recently, the WHO also developed a set of guidelines for these responders about how to help themselves and also help others. So there's many things that people can do.
It's interesting that you mentioned routine as well as part of some of the coping strategies. I was reading a Times op-ed. Scott Kelly, a retired NASA astronaut, spoke about spending nearly a year on the International Space Station and describing the tremendous psychological value of following a routine and a structured life with this consistent bedtime, breakfast time, etc. How important is it scientifically to maintain this certain rhythm and structure to the day, even if it's getting harder and harder for us to do so right now?
It's extremely important because I can tell from the research we're doing, like we're also doing the research in the how to facilitate fast and sustainable return to work among the people, who are off work because of mental health issues. We found a very critical thing for getting back to work is you have to build a routine first. Like you have to get up on the regular time and have good sleep and eat regular meals, and you do physical exercise. If you cannot build such a routine, it's very likely or you're at high risk to relapse, even though you're returned to work. And if you haven't built such a routine yet, it's going to hurt your chance of return to work. So I think even to overcome this pandemic-related mental health or stressful situation, build a routine is extremely important.
And we're heading into an exceptionally challenging period, aren't we, with the holiday season upon us? We're people tend to feel exceptionally lonely. Would that be a particularly difficult time in terms of mental health risks?
Yeah, as I just mentioned at the beginning, it always comes in, I would say, perfect time and literally from the negative way. And the public health measure restrictions, and you have to stay at home, and that make you feel lonely. I think this is particularly bad or worse for people living in a long-term home care for the senior people. Loneliness is kind of a more critical factors for the mental health of senior.
And even during the first phase of lockdown, we saw people finding different ways to cope with this. And there was a big gap in demand and supply at animal shelters as people adopted pets. Is that also a rewarding process to maybe have a sort of emotional support companion at this time when we can't be with all our loved ones this Christmas?
Yeah, some find it is very helpful. I think there's also some research on that, having a therapeutic dog or pets, companion animals, and people found that that's very soothing their emotional, relieve their stress. Like I mentioned, so there's a number of ways or things people can do to help themselves. You have to find the things that are effective for you. And the things you do working for you may not work for somebody else. So you need to do the things that are effective for yourself based on your own situation.
And a lot of us initially coped with self-isolation we were in basic survival mode in a way, doing reading or, mindless Netflixing. Is it time to find that we have to invest a little bit more now, be more creative, have a more philosophical approach about coping with this in a way, because this situation is not going away anytime soon?
I found that's interesting. We have another project that's on mental health. And we ask people, say, what do you do to kind of reduce your stress related to work or related to your daily stress? And many of these men say, they do physical activities, they play hockey after work. Or they say, I just reading helped me to, get my mind off the work or the bad things happen. Or they say, I'm just sitting in front of a TV and not, thinking anything, just to take my mind off everything, or just doing the mindless things. That's helpful. So there's a variety of opinion there. Again, it's depend on whether or not that's, that strategy is helpful for you.
Right. So no one size fits all, and no judgment, as we are all struggling similarly through an unprecedented time.
Good point.
Thank you so much, Dr. JianLi Wang, for your time and your insight.
Well, thank you for having me.
I was talking to Dr. JianLi Wang, Director of the Work in Mental Health Unit at the Royal Institute of Mental Health Research, affiliated with the University of Ottawa. That's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. This Matters is hosted and produced by me, Sabai Tazaz, Adrian Chung, and Raju Mudhar. Produced and mixed by Sean Pattenden, and our Director of Programming is JP Fozo. Our show theme music is by SoCalled, and our episode music is by Mike DeAngelis. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.